Alright, what we're about to tie is called a Screaming Banshee. This is a skating caddis pattern I came up with this last summer, sort of based off of a old steelhead style skater called a moose turd, which has got a forward facing wing, an advanced wing that faces out the front that makes a planing surface. Works wonderfully on those big steelhead skaters and works, as it turns out, wonderfully on a little caddis skater as well. So what I'm going to start with here is a Tiemco 2487. This is a size 14 in this case, typically tied in size 14, 16, and 18. This is a 14 just for demonstrative purposes. Usually, fish in 14, 16 size range. Down in the 18 and 20 size range makes a nice skating midge pattern as well. A little harder to tie, just kind of downsize all your material so you're using less of everything and you'll be fine. I'm going to start with some 8/0 unithread in camel color, which is what is called brown here in America. And I'll take this thread and I'm going to start it just here behind the hook eye. And I'll make a thread base over about the front third or so of the hook. You can see I've got a tag end hanging out there. I'm not really concerned with that just yet. And one of the first things I'll do here is I'm going to tilt that hook up just a bit. And you can see how that'll make the front end of the hook a little bit more square to the tabletop, so it's a little more parallel. That's just going to make gravity work for me rather than against me here in these next few steps. And I'll reposition the hook as needed. I'm going to bring this thread back up to the hook eye, and right behind the hook eye, right up against the return loop, I'm going to make a little ball of thread like a thread head, just like you'd finish a fly ordinarily. That's going to help to prop this wing up and keep it out of the hook eye. So for the forward wing and what will become the shell back on this fly, I'm going to use some yearling elk. This is bull elk in this case. It's sort of light colored. Absolutely, you could use cow elk hair as well. This is just a little longer. It makes it a little easier on these larger size flies. So I'm going to take a clump of this and cut that down as close to the hide as I can. And I always start off with a much bigger clump than I'll ultimately need. And one of the tricks to doing any hair fly is to get this hair cleaned out well. To do that, what I'll do here is I'm going to grab as close to the tips as I can. I'll kind of slide my fingers up to the tips, leaving the butt ends exposed, so that I can pull all this underfur and short hair out. You can see that sort of dubbing like underfur and those shorter, finer hairs. I want to remove those because they're not the same diameter as the main clump, which I've got here. You can see that hair is obviously different diameter. It's not going to compress or flare at the same rate, so I want to make sure that I get that out of there. I'll pull out any extra short fibers as well. Always want to be diligent about cleaning that hair out. That'll make the job a lot easier. Now I'm going to take this hair and I'm going to put it tips down in my stacker, and I'll start with my medium-sized stacker. And I'll stack that up, and I'll show you what comes out of here. That's a nice, pretty clean, even stack. I can see one broken tip in there, and I always remove those just because they bug the hell out of me. So I am going to get that one out of there. Hopefully you can see it. I'll turn that a little bit. So I'm going to take this out of my stacker, and I'll show you how to get rid of those broken tips. See if I can get it where you can see it. I'll come in and I just sort of pinch the end of it. Because they're bigger diameter, I can pinch the end and pull it out. That hair was actually broken pretty far down, so much bigger diameter. And then I'll go through and just make sure that there's not any more. I look pretty good there. So I'm going to take that clump. Now that I've got it stacked, I have a little better idea of how much hair I've got. And I'm going to thin this down just a little bit. So I'm going to take out some of the shortest hairs there. Like so. And now I'll take this clump, and because it's pretty well stacked already, what I'll do now is I'm going to put it in my smaller diameter stacker. Get these two together here. I'm going to put it in the smaller stacker there. And what this will do, I'll just give it a few taps. I'm not so much stacking it, but the smaller stacker will bundle the hair into a nice neat little bunch. Makes it a little easier to work with. So I'm going to grab that clump. And I'll take this bunch of hair and I want to measure it about a hook shank length long. That's a touch long there, so I'm going to bump this forward just a bit. To about a shank length. And while I've been sitting here, you can see my thread's hanging relatively just still. That means it's unwound and it's about as flat as it's going to get right there. So I'm going to spin this up a bit. I want to cord this thread up. 8/0 thread is a pretty round configuration to start with, but when I spin it up, it'll bite into the hair a little bit better. It's got a little bit more texture, a little more edge to it, so it'll bite into the hair a little bit better and help to flare it. So I'm going to take that hair, measure it about a shank length long, Then I'm going to lay it in place, and I'm going to take one turn, and then the next turn, I'll move my fingers back here a bit. The next turn is going to be directly behind that, and it's butted up to it. It's very subtle. You can see I just exaggerated that a little bit to put the next turn right behind it. Now I want to square that up on the hook, and I'm going to tighten the thread toward me. And this is the same way that I'll do any hair wing fly, elk-hair caddis included, humpies, any type of hair wings. I'll put 2 turns around it, and then I'm going to tighten the thread toward me to flare that hair in place. You can see I'm holding onto the hook shank here with my material hand, as well as the butt ends of the hair. Don't cheat and try to look and make sure everything's in place. You don't want to let go of this hair that you've gotten in your material hand until you've got it all anchored down. And those 2 turns have just compressed it so far. So now what I want to do to further anchor this is I'm going to make a band of thread coming backwards. And this might be, 15, 16, 18 turns of thread. I want to make some space up here on the hook. Now obviously that's a wider band than I'd make on an elk-hair caddis or a humpy, but in this case I need that to be the base of the wing that we're going to put on later. So I want to make that wide enough that I've got plenty of room there. Now I've got that hair anchored. You can see how I can pull on the thread and none of that hair moves at all. It's not rolling, it's not flaring, it's not standing up anymore. It's all anchored down and compressed underneath that band of thread. Now I'm going to take these butt ends. You can see we've got a lot of them. Obviously we have enough hair for that forward wing, but these butt ends, because they're bigger diameter, are just too much. So I'm going to take about 75% of them away. I'll try to lift the top half here. I'll come in and you can see I've got the butt ends pulled up. I'll take the scissor tips and push down on the scissors and pull up on the hair and cut that as close as I can. You can see that made just a slightly angled cut there. That'll help to taper these butt ends down. Right now I'm going to take just a second to make sure that I have about the right amount of hair here. I'm going to thin this down just a touch more. Precisely 4 hairs too many, so I just got those out of the way. Now I'm going to take and I'm going to tilt my hook again just to expose the hook bend a bit. So I'm going to tuck this back a bit. And then I'll grab onto these butt ends, and what I'll do now is I'll spiral the thread back over these butt ends down around the bend of the hook, and I want to come well down around the bend. You don't want to get so far down that you start to encroach on the actual hooking capability of the hook, but you do want to have some curvature to the fly. And you can see I did that nice and even and smooth. I want to try to keep this underbody as smooth as I can. We're going to make a tinsel body over this, so if we've got lumps or bumps or pieces sticking out, it's going to disrupt the overbody. So we want to make sure that underbody is pretty and smooth right now. Now I'll bring my thread forward again and just kind of further smooth that underbody off. And I'll wrap right up to the base of the butt ends where I clipped them off. So nice and smooth there. That's going to be important. Now I'm going to take a piece of medium opal Mirage Tinsel. I use a lot of this on a lot of my flies. And in the case of this size 14, it's medium. On a 16 or an 18, I would go to small size. That's just something to keep in mind. Makes it a little bit easier. And I'm going to make a double layer tinsel body on here. So what I'll do is I'll tie this piece of tinsel in just behind these butt ends with 2, 3, 4, 5 turns. And it doesn't mean that you have to tie it in with exactly 5. Just be aware of how many turns you made. Now I'm going to take this tinsel and I'm going to wrap it from the front to the back. Now as you do this, you want to be careful to miss the hook point as you come around here. If you nick the hook point and nick that tinsel, it'll break and it all blows up. It's never happened to me, but I saw a couple guys do it and it was catastrophic. So I'm going to get all the way back to the bend here. I want to make sure that I tuck right up against the edge, and then I'll come forward again. You can see as I'm making these wraps, they're slightly overlapping. Make a nice smooth body right back up to the front. Now we know that I tied that in with 5 turns, so I can undo at least 3 of those. 1, 2, 3, even 4, and then I can tie that back off with a couple more turns. So now I've just tied that tinsel on and off with the same 3 turns of thread. Just less bulk. It's not a huge deal on a 14. When you get down to an 18 or a 20, it becomes a bigger deal. So just an easy way to save bulk, and that's a good technique on any material that you're going to start and stop in the same spot. So I'll trim that tinsel out, and again I'll just reposition the hook now. I don't need the hook bend exposed so much now. So I'll set it back in the vise in the conventional manner so it's straight. Now for the wing, nope, we're not going to do the wing yet. We're going to do the thorax. The thorax on this is just brown superfine dubbing. And obviously you can change this color to whatever color your local caddis are. And it's not a ton of dubbing. You can see we've got a fair amount of bulk on the hook already here. Thin this down just a bit. I'm going to apply this to the thread in a thin strand. I always like a thin strand of dubbing as tight on the thread as I can get it. I'm going to build a thorax here, so I'll overlap a bit over that tinsel. And I want to stop just behind these butt ends that are sticking out here. I've left those exposed on purpose. It's a good indicator. Sort of an egg-shaped thorax, just a slight taper to it, and I'm leaving just that barely edge of that elk hair left exposed, just so you have a reference point there. Obviously you could cover it as long as you know exactly where that spot is, but you can see where I trimmed that. That's going to leave us some room to put the wing in. Now I'm going to jump up onto that band of thread where we anchored the forward wing initially. Now for the wings, I'm going to use, this is coastal deer, which is just proportionally smaller deer hair. Got nice thick butt ends that will flare nicely and beautiful tips that will stack nicely. So I'm going to take this clump and I'm going to start with a pretty good sized bunch, relative to the hook size. And I want to clean this out the same way we did with the elk hair. I'm going to hold it as close to the tips as I can. And I want to pull all that underfur and short hair out. With this short stuff, I kind of fan my finger back and forth through it. And that'll loosen up all that underfur and get that out of our way. That underfur will soak up water. It also inhibits the stacking process, so we want to make sure that we get that all out. And now I'll take this clump of hair and I'll put it in my smaller stacker. With this smaller, shorter bunch, if I put it in a larger size stacker, it can go in at an angle and it won't stack up as neatly, so I want to use a smaller stacker for this. I'll put it in my small stacker and give it a few taps. So I've got a nice, evenly stacked bunch of hair, and you can see that's a really nice chunk of hair. Very, very short black tips, narrow little tan-colored band, and then we're right into the larger diameter butts that'll flare nicely. So I'm going to take this clump of hair, I'll reverse it in my fingers so it's going tips back. And I did take a look through there to make sure I don't have any broken tips. I don't see any. That doesn't mean they're not there, but if they're still there, we can get rid of them. So I'm going to take this clump of hair and I'm going to measure it against that forward wing, which should be a shank length long, or I can measure it against the hook, which is always a shank length long. But we want to make sure that it's the same length. And I'll take it and mark it against my fingers here. Just butt my fingers together. And now I'm going to trim it off in my fingertips there. I'm going to hold this over my trash can. Make one clean cut so I've got a nice square edge across the front edge of that hair, right at a shank length long. I'm going to square that up just a bit. Now again, my thread's been hanging, so it's flattened out a little bit. I want to spin this up. Anytime I anchor down a clump of hair, I'll spin my thread up a bit so it bites in better. I'm going to take the butt ends of that hair, and you can see how it makes about a 45-degree angle between the flared wing and the butt ends of the hair right here, this edge. You can see how it's butted right against the butt end of the wing. And I'm going to take, again, just 2 turns around. I'm going to put one turn, next turn right behind it, right on top. Now I haven't pulled yet. I'm going to take my finger, because we're on the larger arbor of those butt ends of that elk hair, I'm going to take my index finger and put it against the far side and just hold it in place as I tighten that thread down to flare that hair in place. I'll take one more turn through those butt ends just to anchor everything down. You can see I've got just a little bit of flare left there. I'm going to slide my vise down just a bit so that taller wing will show on the camera well. I'll give you an idea of what we've got. We've got that hair flared across the top, all on top, nothing coming across the bottom. Now the trickiest part of this fly is dividing this wing right now. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to come in and just part this wing in half. I just sort of do this with my fingertips, and I know this isn't showing very well because my hands are in the way. I'll turn this a bit to give you an idea. I'm going to grab half of the far side and half of the near side and just divide that hair to each side. That's not exactly even because I was trying to show you, so I'll get this a little bit more evenly split. And it doesn't have to be perfectly clean by any stretch. You know, we've got some room here, but I do want a nice open center on that so that I can get these butt ends up between the wings. So about like so is what I need. Now what I'll do is I'm going to pick up these butt ends, and I want to make sure I get all of them. I'm going to pick up these butt ends, and I've got these in my thread hand, and I'm going to give them about a quarter twist. Don't cord them up into a rope, just give them a quarter twist. That'll help to bundle them together. And I'll pull them up between those two wings, And I'm going to bring my thread up and over. And now as I do this, I want you to watch where my thread goes. See how it'll come through the butt end, or the tip ends of the wings? I used to really try to make sure that I got in front of the wing. It's not a big deal. This wing is ultimately going to be flared, so it's not a big deal if I've got the thread coming through the butt ends of the wings. So I'm going to come around, I'm going to get 2 turns there. Now again, I'll pinch from the bottom and I'll draw it straight down on the thread to flare that elk hair in place. And you can see that's now spread across the top of the fly. Now I'm going to grab all these butt ends. I'm going to grab them up taut, and I'll push the scissors right down flush to the butt ends of the deer hair and trim those off there. So those butt ends just kind of get buried in the deer hair. You can see how wide our wing profile is here. I'll spread this out just a little bit. If you've got anything crazy that's sticking out through the actual shell back, you can kind of trim those out. Now the last thing I'll do is I'm going to take and tilt this hook one more time, and I'm going to take my thumbnail up against the hook eye, and I'm going to spread this forward wing so I get about a 180-degree arc. I'll turn that a bit so you can get an idea of what I'm doing. I'm going to spread that wing out as much as I can, and then I'll sweep it back. I'm going to build a little thread dam in front of it. And this is going to wedge that wing just slightly up. It's about a 45-degree angle to the hook. I don't want it up 90 degrees like you would with a normal hair wing. I just want to prop this up a bit. You can see I'm just tucking those wraps right up against the base of the wing to spread that wing across the front of the fly. Like so. And now I'll come in with my whip finisher. And I'll whip finish here underneath the base of the wing. So I'll draw a little bit of thread out here. You can see I work that from the bottom so I don't disrupt the wing. Now just a little bit of final preening here. I'm going to draw these back wings forward, and I'm going to end up with not quite a 360-degree spread, but pretty close to it. I've got one hair in there I don't like. So I want to spread that front wing as far as I can, and those back wings I'll spread forward a bit to create some surface area. You can see we've got a pretty big spray of material creating a lot of surface area on the fly. It's almost round, and that comes from the 2 clumps of hair being the same length. From the bottom, we've got a lot of surface area. We've got the little body that hangs down in there, sort of fluttering wings. That forward-facing wing is going to make the fly skate and skitter much better than a conventional, say elk hair caddis type pattern that's got a wedge shape to the front of it. This is going to hold the fly up on the surface as you skate it. Now one thing that I do on this fly that I don't do on all flies, because we've got all that hair tied in at one spot, is I will put a drop of head cement just on the base of all those thread wraps where we've got everything tied in. So I'll take just a thin drop, I'll put it right on the base of that thread, and let that bleed into the tie down. We've got all that hair tied in, essentially tied in and tied off all at the same point. So we want to anchor that point. That'll also stiffen that hair up a bit for that forward facing wing. And that's our Screaming Banshee. Cool little fly, kind of unusual, different profile than you're used to. You can see the back wings are the fluttering wings of the caddis. He's kind of stuck in the shuck or crippled up a little bit. He's got that forward facing wing to make him skate well. This is not just a skating fly though. This fly has worked really well. Just fished dead drift in shallow water. It makes a nice impression in the surface film. It's got a lot of surface area as well, so it's really a good floater. You can see again from that bottom view what a nice wide profile we've got. Surface area is what makes your fly float, and this fly's got a lot of surface area. Really a fun little fly. Little details, make sure your stacks are nice and neat, make sure your measurements on the hair are exactly right. That's how you get the nice even spread across the top. That's a Screaming Banshee. You know where to find us, charliesflyboxinc.com.